You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 196 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj Bhojwani. This week on the pod, preview season is in full swing for the Hunted as we near to Prague and the world premiere happening this weekend. We are in the thick of things. We are seeing a lot of cards come through from Majestics to Legendaries to Commons. We know we're going to see majority of the Majestics and Legendaries either today when this pod drops or we would have already seen majority of them. And we're going to see the rest of the cards, Commons, and I assume the Fable if someone opens it over the weekend. In fact, our card is dropped at this point as well. Quick dodge flexes. So yeah, it's all happening.
Really exciting time. Spoiler season is like well upon us, and it's been intense quick. It's been very quick. Every few hours I check the Discord and there's a new spoiler to salivate over to some extent. With that, let's get into our week in Flesh and Blood, Hayden. And for my week, just been consuming a whole bunch of spoilers, engaged in discussions around it. And my cope on Fang is reducing by the minute. I think I mentioned last week that I was high on cope of Fang and I just need more spoilers so I can just accept that he's bad and then I don't need to cope on him anymore.
Yeah, but you wish
that's kind of happening. Yeah, that's kind of happening. And we'll get more on that in the main topic.
Yeah,
how's your week been?
About it. We'll talk about that. Similar, I mean, digesting these previews as they come in. It's interesting, you spoke about they're coming in thick and fast, and it does feel like, this to me feels like an old school, I say old school, fad preview season. This doesn't feel like the last couple of preview seasons where it was more spread out, I would say. This feels more like what I would have expected from, prior to heavy hitters, to be honest, or, heavy hitters, bright lights backwards. This is what those previous seasons felt like. If you're maybe an MST joiner or you joined during Rosetta, for instance. Also, firstly, welcome to Arsenal Pass and thank you for listening and picking us up this year. But yeah, I do think this feels a bit more like an old preview season. Otherwise, I'm just trying to get through a few things. I head off back home for my wedding in less than 2 weeks.
Congrats!
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little bit under the weather, so if I sound a bit blocked up or I struggle to talk a little bit, I do apologize. I am fighting off a bit of a cold. But yeah, there's so much happening right now, and not least is these amazing previews, and they're getting me hyped. Honestly, just the art on some of the stuff is getting me hyped enough just by itself. So yeah.
And you brought up the preview season. I actually really like the cadence of this preview season.
Yeah, me too.
So for the main cards in the set, we're getting those thick and fast right now over these past few days. But I feel like the weeks leading up to this, we were getting the expansion slot, the drip feed of the expansion slot cards that we saw.
Yeah.
Like one off at a time on a weekly basis on like a Battle Hardened stream or a calling stream. And that whole pace of it has actually been amazing, in my opinion. And I think they might have landed on, I don't know about saying perfect, but on a very, very good way to do a spoiler season. Because I think some of the previous ones, there has been a little bit of disagreement on whether the spoiler season was done well. I think particularly the one where they only showed us the commons leading up to the world premiere.
Yeah, Rosetta,
I think that was Rosetta. Where we saw like 10 zaps. But this one has felt really, really good. I think they've landed on a very good way to hype up the set.
Yeah, even just last on that quickly, you want people pre-ordering the set. You want people getting excited. You want people to see a card and be like, oh, actually, you know what? I'm dropping things and I'm going to the world premiere. I live in Texas, or I live out in Pacific Northwest, and I just saw this awesome Majestic for Rosetta, and I'm going to quickly check last-minute flights down to was Miami, Florida, sorry, was it? And I'm going, right, because I'm just that hyped about it, so yeah, I agree. News?
So in the news, we have a whole bunch of Hunted previews, and we'll get to that in the main topic, because today's main topic is discussing the previews that we've seen so far and how these heroes are shaping up to be. Other than that, Battle Hardened Toronto was this past weekend. Huge shout out to Michael Yasker for winning that on Zen. Once again, MST showing its prominence in this current meta. 6 out of 8 MST heroes were top 8, and 4 out of 4 of the top 4 were MST heroes. Also want to shout out Savage Feats for putting on this show. It was very, very well done, and I really enjoyed the coverage and the casting.
Yeah, I did. I picked up a bit of it. We were watching it while we recorded a Patreon podcast for January. Got a shout out to my boy, the kid, Michael Yazka. Congrats on taking down the Battle Hardened, and not. I'm gonna give him a hard time though. Not on Leviathan, not on Fire. I don't understand. I mean, this is what happens when you pick up a real deck, and Michael is a good player. So
that's exactly what I messaged him. I was like, "Congrats on winning the Battle Hardened," and I was like, glad to see you're not on Florian anymore. See, this is what happens when you play a good hero.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm calling Portland. He shows up on Florian, and I was like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you?"
Didn't know that.
yeah, he was on Florian, and I was like, "Why are you on Florian?" And he's like, "It's a good deck, man." I was like, "No, it's not." And then he picks up Zen and wins a Battle Hardened, and I was like, "There you go, dude."
The Yakuza lore on this pod runs deep. It's been a long time running, and I'm a big fan of Michael. He's a great dude. So, and his name's Michael, so he's destined for great things if he plays good decks. That's just how it works. So, you know,
it is the unsaid law.
Yeah, exactly. Come on, Cookout. We're going to quickly rip through a great Commander Cookout question, actually, before we get into these previews. So if you do want to get your question for the Commander Cookout, you can most certainly do so. ArsenalPassFab@gmail.com. You can drop us a message in the Discord if you're a patron, or if you want to, just like this person did, you can even give us a question in person. Not only did this person not write it down, I think Pankaj had to remember this question, but also you can just drop things in the YouTube comments below and let us know it is a question for the Commander Cookout. Because this was given to you in person, Pankaj, I'm going to let you read this question.
Yep, this came from Damian Riggins. It was at Chicago, the LL calling. He just came up to me and I was like, "Hey, I've got a question for Command and Cookout. I'm just going to tell it to you." So he told it to me and I had to message Hayden instantly so I don't forget. His question was, what is the definition of mid-range?
It's a good question too. It's a nice, simple, on the face of a question, but it is anything but simple, I think, when it comes to defining mid-range in Flesh and Blood. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you can start.
I've had this debate for a very long time. Me and my friend Brendan Patrick, about a year ago, maybe even longer, we did a podcast on archetypes in Flesh and Blood. And there was this, I guess there's been a lot of discussion on how you define archetypes in Flesh and Blood over the years. You know, can you take traditional archetypes that come from other games, particularly ones that were widely adopted by Magic the Gathering, which is where mid-range, I think, predominantly would be seen. Aggro, control, mid-range combo, right? That's kind of the traditional big four that people think about. And we spoke about, there was a great video that was done on Flesh and Blood as a fighting game, right? I think it was, I feel like it was Gorganian Tome that did it, right? But I need to double check that, because I do know him, and I want to check that it was him that did that.
I remember that video blowing up. I remember people being very excited about the video. I also don't remember who did that.
Yeah, I want to, before I quote that it was Dylan, but I'm pretty sure it was. But anyway, I will double check that. I will fact check myself on that one. But effectively, introduced was, you know, this idea that instead of those four kind of traditional archetypes in Flesh and Blood, they're heroes in Flesh and Blood act out more like fighting game heroes in your classic fighting games, such as Street Fighter, etc., Mortal Kombat. And I think that's really interesting. But I do think for the majority of players, they're going to come from card games. And so these more traditional archetypes work better. And I think when it comes to mid-range, you have to adapt it a little bit slightly to maybe the traditional meaning of mid-range. At least that's how I see it. And I think basically, if I was to put it simply, for me, using mid-range in Flesh and Blood, it's down to turn cycle value. And I think a mid-range deck is looking to extract turn cycle value on both the offensive and defensive end, as opposed to maybe an aggressive deck is doing it mostly, if not exclusively, on the offensive end, and then a control deck is doing it majority on the defensive end, is kind of what I would say. I do think every deck in Flesh and Blood, though, is a sliding scale of mid-range, honestly, if you put it that way. It's on the spectrum somewhere. But I do think that kind of gives a reasonable definition.
I love these conversations around these nebulous concepts that are very, very murky and hard to define. The other one that comes to mind is tempo.
Yes.
Like, what is tempo in Fab? It's a very, very similar type of question. So honestly, my answer for this is actually very similar to yours, but it's phrased very differently. Well, first, my joke answer is mid-range is when you're mid at a range of things. Ha ha ha. But also,
True.
I think for me, the way I like to view fab decks, and I've like spoken to like locals about this before, is what is your optimal hand conversion ratio, like hand size conversion ratio on offense? So, for example, if you think of an aggro deck like Fi, his optimal offensive hand ratio is 4 cards, like 4 to 5 cards. That's where he wants to be, and that's where he can extract the most value on a numbers basis. On a turn-to-turn cycle basis, where when he has 4 to 5 cards, that's when he's doing the biggest numbers. When he's holding 4 to 5 cards on offense. Whereas a deck like Oldhim, for example, was definitely not in the 4 to 5 card range. He was more on the 1 to 2 card range of this is how, like, when it's my turn, when I'm on the offense, I want to be holding 1 to 2 cards, and that's when I'm the most efficient. And so to me, mid-range is when you're in the 2 to 3 card range, where you do want to block like 1 to 2 cards a turn cycle and convert 2 to 3 cards a turn cycle, and that's when you are at your most efficient, and that's when your numbers are at its most optimal. That's why I'd say mid-range is. So warriors come to mind, where like a Kasai or a Hatchet's Dory would be, they're okay converting 2 cards, but 3 cards sometime as well. But they definitely do want to be using almost at least 1 card a turn blocking.
Yeah, I think it's a really good explanation. I think the interesting thing is that, I really like that. I think the interesting thing is that a deck, so you can show up to an event with a deck that can range from doing that to not doing that. Like if I take, so you just spoke about Warrior, right? If I use Dorinthia as an example, I think traditionally Dorinthia is going to act in that way, right? Where it's going to play a lot of games, or it's going to be at its best playing games where it does that, where it's maybe 2 to 3 cards, right? 1 to 2 cards defensively, and then 2 to 3 offensively. And then there's going to be games where it plays with all 4 cards offensively, where it wants to side out these defense reactions. It wants to utilize its resources to the fullest and use more. The cost curve might change because of some of the sideboard cards. I think about zero cost attack reactions, for instance, right? Or sharpened steels, for instance. These zero cost buffs that help change the complexion of the cards played because of the cost structure. And I think cost structure is really important when you think about. So you spoke about Fire as kind of, it wants to use 4 cards. It uses 4 cards optimally on defense. That's because offense. Sorry, that's because of the defensive value, and it's also because of the cost structure of the deck and how inherently the more cards you play, the cost structure of the deck gets better because of the hero ability. You're reducing that. You're actually playing into your cost structure. So it is. I think it's very interesting. I think mid-range, I do think it is a scale. I do think all decks sit somewhere along it in Flesh and Blood, to be honest. But I think that mid-range, that true mid-range, say like the middle 80%, it is really vast and big. And decks can even touch in and out of it. Like if I think about something like Ultim, some games it's probably would have been happy to never attack with anything more than the weapon, if even that, right? It might just be like, I'm just going to purely fatigue this person, and it's outside of that 80% in the middle. And then sometimes it encroaches back in when it's like, nope, I'm playing into Icelander or whatever, or Wizard, and I've got to swing my Glacial Footsteps and all these attacks. So it's quite interesting.
There's a lot of variability within heroes for sure. And actually, I think Dory is one of the best examples of that. Yeah. Hatchet's Dory is very much in the, I want to convert 2 to 3 cards per turn. But Dawnblade Dory kind of just goes all over the place. Sometimes Dawnblade Dory wants to convert the full 5 cards. They won't play the Steelblade Supremacy unless they're holding 5 cards alongside Steelblade Supremacy. But sometimes they're like, oh, we can be a little more defensive and just do the 2 to 3 cards. So I think, Warrior probably has quite a bit of variability. And I think to your point about heroes being built differently, also pretty matchup dependent, right? Like Florian, I think against like a not setup deck, like a non-illusionist, would be very happy just converting 2 cards a turn. But then suddenly they're against an Enigma and they're like, bring in the Bramble Sparks, and I want to be converting 4 or 5 card hands if I can, or even channel Mount Heroic or channel Amp Heroic, right?
Yep. I think the last thing I'll say on this is to your point about Dorinthia specifically. And just warriors in general, you spoke about, the flexibility. Let's use the word flexibility, and then I'm going to use a different word. Is actually one of the challenges. It is, I would say, inconsistency as opposed to flexibility in a lot of these cases, and that's what causes the challenges for. I think if you are playing all over the spectrum of mid-range, I think it's going to be very difficult for you unless the format and the meta are under very specific circumstances for that to be good, to be honest. And I think that is something, if I wanted to challenge Flesh and Blood metas to deliver us one thing in the next year or so, it would probably be that I would like to see metas where that range, playing in the mid-range, is a bit more viable, I think, as opposed to a more dominant end of that spectrum being the correct option to play into for consistency reasons and to leverage the power of particular cards and heroes.
I have a feeling we're going to come back to the inconsistency of Warrior in the main topic when we talk of Fangs. Spoiler. But with that, it's a great segue into our main topic. Thank you again to Damien for giving us his Command and Cookout question. As always, if you'd like to get your question in, go ahead and email us. Email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com or message us in Discord, leave a YouTube comment, talk to us at event. Main topic time, Hayden. And before we go into specific cards and a specific Majestics and L's that we've seen so far, I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the higher level mechanics in the Hunted that we're seeing, which I think are actually really, really exciting. The one I'm most excited for is Marked, because of how much interaction there is on both sides. Something that's like really, really cool. All these heroes have payoffs for hitting marked heroes, but there's also payoffs for attacking a marked hero, right? There's a cycle of Draconic cards, the zero, I forget the name, but there's a cycle where when you attack a marked hero, you make a fealty. So for that, you want your opponent to be marked when you go ahead and do this, but you have other cards that care about actually landing a hit on a marked hero. I mean, both the Draconic heroes in the set have that on the hero text box, where when you hit a marked hero, you get a fealty. So in some ways, your opponent is incentivized. The opponent needs to make a call on when they should let you hit them, and you get the on hit of the marked, but it takes the mark off of you, so it turns off some other cards, versus when they need to block to stop the marked on hit, but then they remain marked because of it. And I think that interplay just seems extremely engaging.
I love mini games within the game, and I think, you know, one of the things that's probably going to push people ahead of others at the world premiere, for instance, and the calling this weekend is understanding how to play that mini game, right? There will be people who immediately go, I'm going to try and block out everything, and then they're going to get hit, and it's going to be at the time that they don't want, and they're going to lose more value, and they're probably going to have lost value because they blocked inefficiently to try and stop this effect in the first place. So yeah, to your point, it's about, okay, when do I find the right time to what is the card that is least threatening, or how do I find that card? And there'll be such fun things in Limited and in Constructed where it's like, okay, the opponent is marked, I come in with a slightly weaker on hit for mark, my opponent lets it through because they're trying to set up a hand, I then mark them again and play a more threatening card, and all of a sudden their game plan is in shambles, right? Like, I'm now threatening such high value from my opponent being marked, for instance. So it's really interesting. Or, you know, you get through their equipment early by using your less threatening mark on hit payoffs, and then you set up the bigger marked payoffs later in the game, for instance. So it is a very cool mechanic, I agree. And you know what, actually, as much as I'm excited for this for Constructed, being the Limited lover that I am, I think this mechanic looks like one of the coolest for Limited. And to have one central mechanic to a set like this is so interesting. We've not seen, really, when you look at it, we've not seen anything like this before. Something that we've had mechanics that really own the game, right? I think about Clash, for instance. I think about, you know, just Transcending, for instance, right? But this one is something that everyone has to, you're playing around it the whole time. It's a factor in every single turn. This will be a factor in almost every single turn of your game, whether you're currently marked, whether the opponent's currently marked or not. It's going to play in because it's going to factor in the way you arsenal, the way you pitch cards, the way you set up things, the way you build your decks. And I think that is very cool design.
It reminds me most of Wager and Clash from heavy hitters. But to your point, yeah, Wager and Clash felt very much like, Clash especially felt very much as like, okay, my card says Clash, we do the thing. There isn't too much like decision making around that. It's very much, okay, let's see the top of the deck. And there's decision making in the deck building process or the drafting process, not so much when it's actually being played out. Wager is also a little bit more, you kind of need to decide whether you want to wager a little wager or not, and there's the blocking aspect of it. But Marked just feels like a whole different beast because it also plays a lot into what you brought up earlier, which is the sequencing side of it. So I'm sequencing my turn right now, and I need to and say I make a play and my opponent's marked. And if I want to extend the chain, I need to make sure that I have lines for if my opponent lets it hit and they're no longer marked for my second attack, or if they block and then they are still marked for a second attack, and how does that potentially change what I want to do? Especially when you think of Arachne, I think, because there's almost certainly going to be times where you want to make sure your opponent is marked by the end of your turn so that you can flip and become a chaos agent. But that means how do you guarantee that? Are you supposed to end on something that marks them so that they can't take a hit afterwards to remove the mark? Or what's going to happen there? Right? And their text box for that reason is also very, very interesting, where it's on hit, gain, go again. Like a stealth card gets go again if it hits a marked hero. So your opponent can let the mark get removed, but then you
get to play more cards. Yeah,
exactly. So it's just the theory wise of it. I'm really looking forward to how this plays both in CC and draft, because the other reason I relate this a little bit to Age and Clash is that there are a whole bunch of generic cards that work with marked, and even the generic class cards, right? Some of the generic assassin cards care about marked and stuff, and we're seeing generic cards that mark opposing heroes or have that interplay, which is but we'll see whether it has the CC impact, because Wage and Clash kind of both had a little bit but not too much, but we'll see whether this one maybe stays a little longer.
Yep. What about Royal? Talk to me about Royal.
This was super interesting because, what is Royal? It's not a talent. It's a sub-talent. And this is the first time we are seeing that, in CC at least, being printed directly onto a hero, right? We saw this in Blitz with the Emperor, but that's, I feel that was a very, very special case. He was also dual class and Royal, sure. But in CC, this is just an additional type line that's just added to the hero. It's strictly additive. And it reminds me a little bit of when they gave Rangers quivers, where Rangers were running around with this thing and suddenly the set came out and they just got a whole new equipment piece and a whole new, just class of cards that they can just add, and it doesn't cost them deck building slots or anything. I mean, it costs them a slot in the 80, but it doesn't cost them a card in the 60, a place in the 60, or even a place in the equipment zone. Is just entirely additive. Royal reminds me a little bit of that as well, where there's all these cards that have payoffs when you are Royal, and these heroes just get that for free. Now, on the other hand, there are also some cards that get payoffs if your opponent is Royal. I think Regicide comes to mind. But there are way more cards that care about you being Royal, and you can just get those effects. Imperial Warhorn, Imperial Ledger, all these other cards. Those are pretty bad cards, to be fair. But I guess Warhorn maybe not in the correct meta. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing to bring up as well, that we are sort of getting these heroes that are inherently sort of just from their type line a little bit, I don't say stronger, but they have just something added to them on top of the talent and the class that we haven't seen before in CC.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I think we've purposely not seen Royal cards in the set, right? Payoffs. So you talk about Ledger, Warhorn, these cards from previous sets. We haven't seen anything from this set, right? That says if you're Royal X. I'm not sure we are going to see them. I to your point, is this what is is it also a balancing tool? I think about, you spoke about Regicide, for instance, just before. I'm interested to see what it means exactly. I'm expecting, if I had to put money on it, I would expect that we see 2 to 3 cards that effectively that have Royal payoff, so to speak. They care about you being Royal in the set. And I think they're going to be very, you spoke about quivers, right? I think it's a really good parallel example because they're tight, they're kept very condensed, they're very careful about how they use them, and I think Royal might be similar, albeit in a lot of different ways, of course. But yeah, how are we going to see that play out? I think there will be a couple of cards. I imagine either we won't see them previewed, we'll see them at the World Premiere, or we'll see them very late, or maybe we've already seen them by the time this pod drops. We are trying to drop this pod about 12 hours, a little bit longer. This is like a day and a half after we record, so yeah, we'll see.
Yep.
All right.
Did you have something to bring up about majestic weapons?
Yeah, I assume by the time that so I have not seen this on the Discord stream, but I got sent a picture, so I don't know whether to talk about it or not. I don't know where it came from. I didn't get sent a picture. I saw it in a group. But I assume since we're about to release this before the world premiere, it's fine to talk about majestic weapons are back.
I did not know this. Honestly, when I saw this in our show notes, I was like, what is this? I haven't seen this. So Tell us more.
Well, I'm now worried that it's either I want to make sure that it's firstly real. It looks pretty real to me, and secondly, that this is not someone's preview card, right? So we're going to talk about this, and I might cut this out. If you're hearing this, then we've already seen it. If we don't see it, then I'm going to cut this out. But effectively, we've seen a majestic weapon. It is, I will just quickly read it. I don't have the card image up, I guess, necessarily. It is a assassin weapon dagger, one hand, that attacks for one. It is part of the main set. Its set number is 009, so it is part of the main set. It is assassin weapon dagger, one hand. It says once per turn action, 2 resources attack, go again. And it has, when this hits a hero, mark them, and it has piercing 1.
What? That is insane. Wait, so that is like Spider's Bite, Scale Peeler, that sort of stuff, except instead of
it marks them,
costing them defense values in future, it just straight up marks them, and it doesn't destroy itself like the token rarity ones do.
Correct. And it's part of the set, which would indicate that this is a very powerful card to get in limited.
Yeah.
We spoke about this the other week.
A big part of a big question that hasn't even fully been answered, even at this point of spoiler season, is how are these heroes marking their opponents? Because we've seen so many, like the hero text, right? On both the Royal Heroes and Arachne are all just when your opponent's marked, you get this, you get that. And we've just been looking at these cards being like, what? There's that draconic instant where you have to use a whole card to mark your opponent. We've been seeing cards like that being like, those don't seem very, very efficient ways to mark the opponents. This card, this Hunter's Clave, it just straight up answers that. Yeah, you have a dagger that just marks the opponent. That just seems incredible.
Yep. So we will see. Pankaj, if this isn't in the rest of the pod, then there's a reason for it. But I think this is what the hero needs, right? Really. To be fair, like, is this too good? If there's two, you get to run 2 of these. Is this too good? Or is it just the enabler that you need?
So, Arachne, it's just, we spoke about this when we first looked at Arachne. It's like, they should be swapping, they should be flipping pretty consistently over the course of the game, right? It wouldn't make sense if their hero ability is like this and they only flip, and they're balanced around only flipping like twice a game or something.
Yeah.
And this seems like a dagger that can actually help them flip more often than not. Also remember that when you are an agent of chaos, you will 100% return back to Arachne. You can't go back into another agent of chaos except with a legendary helmet. We'll get to that. But you don't go agent of chaos into another agent of chaos with opponent's mark. You go agent of chaos back to Arachne, back to agent of chaos. And some way to have that be consistent is pretty important, because if it was all tied to just cards you have to draw, and you just draw them at the wrong time, like you draw them when you draw a mark card and you're already an agent of chaos, then you don't get to go back. You don't be an agent of chaos. And the next hand when you're Arachne, you want to draw your mark cards and you don't have them. So I think having on the equipment zone is quite important for the payoffs of that hero.
Yeah, Sip, right? Like we know that Sip is so important to enabling enabling things. So, okay, we'll circle back to this. I'm currently digging to find answers.
Which begs the question, maybe there's a Sip way for the Draconic heroes to mark their opponents. Because that is still a question for Syndra and Fang. We've seen a couple, and with that, I guess probably time to just move into the spoilers that we've seen so far, Hayden.
Yeah, where do you want to start?
I want to start with Public Bounty, because it's just, I think, a great segue into how are these heroes marking their opponents, which has been such a big question mark. So Public Bounty, I think you might have the card image just in case. Cost 1, 2 block, generic action, mark target opposing hero. The next time you attack a marked hero this turn, the attack gets +3, and it has go again. Yeah. So it's come to fight, blocks for 1 less, but it also marks the opponent here. The opponent.
Yeah, this cost structure. I don't have the card image for this one because it just dropped just before we started recording. But the interesting thing about this card is we've seen this cost structure through so many sets. The 1 cost pump that defends 2 and has some upside. And I think it's just at this point, it's a staple that they're using in these sets. I generally find that it means, like what we've seen in the past, it's been a limited staple. But because of how potentially powerful Marked is for, I think, especially for Arachne, this could translate over into Constructed, which is quite interesting.
I was thinking for Fang as well, actually,
Oh, yeah,
because he
yeah.
really needs his fealty tokens.
Yep.
So far from everything that we've seen, he really wants them, and we haven't seen a good way for him to mark yet. So I could see this being there. Also important to know, this is generic. This isn't just tied to any of the heroes in this set. Anyone can go mark their opponents.
Yes, which I guess begs the question, are we going to see non-draconic heroes marking for some reason?
So some of the generic assassin cards that we've seen so far, the non-talented assassin cards that we've seen, do have payoffs for opponent being marked. The one that comes to mind, I guess let's move on to the assassin cards then. I think we originally wanted to do a different order, but fine, this is like a good segue. Mark of the Black Widow, right? It's an assassin action attack, blocks 3, costs 0, so and comes in for 3 as well. So basically, like the Red Infect, the Red Malign, basically that class of stealth cards. It has stealth, and when this hits a marked hero, they banish a card from their hand.
Yeah.
So
we're going to see Azuri marked Azuri deck.
Probably unlikely, but these little packages now are available to the generic heroes. Unless there's a strong density of them, we're probably not going to see Azuri or Nu go ahead and put this package in their decks. But similar to Wager and Clash, right, where it's just now available in the wider pool of cards, and perhaps it just opens up some level of design space in the future for future assassins or future ninjas in that sense.
Yeah, or even just, incidental mark from equipment. I think about, so there's I think about non-Viscerai heroes running Bloodsheath Skelata, right? And using even like Vix and Quill Hand to set up this like sort of mini burst of cheat resources and a bit of extra damage. Like we saw Briar do this a few times in different builds. And it's like, okay, maybe you have an equipment that marks a hero and then you get to use, I'm not saying specifically mark the Black Widow, but you could use non-draconic assassin cards to get a payoff. Maybe you've got like 1 or 2 in the deck that have big payoffs, for instance. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting. It is interesting to me that these are just they're not draconic assassin. I think it plays into what the draconic type is, of course, as well, because if this is draconic, it wouldn't be in blue, right? I honestly think that is just a big part of why these are.
Wait, which card are you talking about?
Mark of the Black Widow, right?
That's the red assassin. Well, I guess. It's a cycle. You mean?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the blue version.
They need to have cycles,
okay,
right?
Got it.
Like they can't have all these assassin cards be draconic simply for the fact that they need to have cycles to these cards as well. And if it was draconic, it wouldn't have a cycle. So I honestly think from a design perspective, that's just a big reason for the fact that these aren't draconic. It's not necessarily because they want them to be able to be played in other assassins. I think that is part of it. That is a nice overlap for them. But I think probably the big driving factor is that they need cards that have cycles in the set.
Did you mean chaos? No, because Arachne's chaos. Like there's
sorry. Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Was chaos only red?
It is. Sorry, is chaos?
Is chaos only in red? So I'm still getting to grips with a lot of the mechanics and the cycles and things in the set.
I don't believe we really know the chaos shtick yet, aside from just the assassin hero ability being some element of randomness in it.
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen any chaos assassin cards. The only other chaos card we've seen is Spurlocked. So Spurlocked and the Arachne hero are the only chaos cards we've seen. And actually, I think I saw someone doing a bit of theory crafting, a little bit of sleuthing, looking through the card numbers, and I think someone said that we won't see any chaos assassin actions. Was someone's read on it. I hope I'm not making that up, and we'll see when the full previews come out. But that might be the case where this is mostly generic assassin cards. And actually, as we're speaking about this, I realize we are forgetting about one assassin. We brought up Uzuri and Nu, but Arachne slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
Slip through the cracks. I could see maybe them doing this marking stuff on the side as well, because you think about Mark of the Black Widow, you mark your opponent, say, with the bounty card, and then your Mark of the Black Widow is a 6 go again. On hit, they banish a card from the hand.
Yeah, good point.
Could see play lines like that being pretty good.
Yeah,
so maybe that's the other reason why these aren't chaos. Yeah.
I guess my point stands for draconic cards as well, though. Like in terms of, if I think about Warrior and Ninja, they can't print the whole set draconic, right? Because there wouldn't be cycles. So, sorry, I guess it doesn't translate to the chaos hero, but it does translate to the draconic heroes when we talk about them, particularly.
Makes sense.
Any other?
Speaking of
Yeah.
speaking of marking cards, I do want to bring up Reaper's Call, which is another assassin action attack. We've seen this cost structure: cost 0, blocks 3, comes in for 3, has stealth. Instant, discard this, mark target opposing hero. So this is the equivalent to the Proclaim Vengeance that the Draconic heroes have access to, where you need to sort of spend a whole card to mark the opponent. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where I was like, we just haven't seen a good way to mark, because this is just not a good way to mark Hayden. In my opinion, this is like a limited card. That's what it reads to me, because if I'm spending a whole card to mark my opponent, I'm not entirely sure whether the payoffs we have seen so far warrant that level of investment into marking your opponent.
I agree. I think this is a limited card, but I think this is a very good limited card. I think one of the things that makes a good limited card when it comes to the mechanics of the set is something that gives you flexibility. I think we saw this in, we've seen this in Heavy Hitters, we've seen this in MST, we've seen this in Rosetta as well. I think these cards that are, for instance, Reaper's Call blue is a 3-block blue that is a stealth card that you might need, but also marks your opponent. So it lets you use, one of the things we've spoken about in the last 2 sets in particular is, well, actually 3 sets, honestly, even Heavy Hitters had this, is how do you use your hand in really efficient ways when your opponent, how do you use your 4 and 5 card hands? And this is a really good way to do that because, you can block with it, attack with it, use the mark ability, even the red one, because it's stealth and blocks 3 and a 0. I think this will also have some impact as well. So, I think this card is a limited card, it seems like, but honestly, I could see people playing the blue one in Constructed to utilize the card for a mark.
Actually, now that you've brought that up, I'm with you. Actually,
do it end of turn as well. Well, so you can do it. Like you were talking about, how do you mark an opponent after if they let you hit, for instance, right? Or as a Arachne end of turn. Well, you just discard this, and now you get to flip or transform.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Yeah, exactly. We spoke about the sequencing puzzles that these heroes might have, and a card like this is perhaps the exact glue piece that you need to ensure that no matter how your opponent deals with the mark, that you still can do whatever you wanted to do. So actually, I think I'm with you. The blue might actually just be straight up be a staple in Arachne Marionette. So should we go ahead and talk about some of the higher rarity cards? There's some other commons that we're just skipping over and stuff. There's, I think, 2 Sides to a Blade sticks out a little bit as another decent way to mark. It's a 1/3 attack reaction that Assassin has. Target attack action card with stealth gets +3 when this hits a hero, mark them. So that's a more on the lines of a more efficient way to mark your opponent, which is pretty good. But I do want to go ahead and talk about the M's and the L here.
Yeah, let's do it. Where do you want to go?
Cool. So the M that we've seen so far, Anaphylactic Shock. It's a 0-cost blue assassin instant trap, which is a type line we've never seen before, an instant trap. And it says, each opposing hero and ally that has dealt damage to you this turn loses 1 life.
Yes. How good is this? Hero and ally. So I'm guessing my first thoughts come to Prism right now.
My thought went to, this is heralding that Dromai is coming back, and this is how Assassin deals with Rake the Embers. Which is sad, because I thought they would just ban Rake the Embers. I'll make sure New Dromai doesn't get to play with that card, because in my opinion, that was the worst offender when Dromai was legal.
Yeah.
Just Rake the Embers was horrendous for most classes to deal with, except Ninja. So this seems to be heralding otherwise, but blue 0-cost trap, no defense value. And on the surface, I think I'm not too excited for this card. The rate doesn't seem very, very good on a normal game basis. You convert this card to deal your opponent 1 most of the time if they don't have allies. But I think there's something to be said about just having access to dealing damage to your opponent on their turn. We see that these days with Aurora, right? The number of times I've seen games end because the opponent goes to 1 and then Aurora shocks them on their turn after they've expended their hand. There is some value inherent in that thing. I'm just not sure whether it warrants the floor of this card being a no block.
Yeah. I mean, my first thought is the art on this card is awesome. Instant Trap is quite interesting, when it doesn't... I guess the you can just play this, right? Which is weird for a trap. Like, generally, so far we've seen traps, you have to have a reason, like the defense reactions, right? That's what we've seen from traps so far. Yeah, so you have your opponent has to be attacking for you to play it. This you can just play out, which is quite interesting for a trap. Like flavor wise, I'm like, I can just spring a trap for no reason, I guess. Like,
Well, it wouldn't do anything unless they've dealt damage. to
right.
you, So
Exactly. I'm just like, okay. It is quite interesting. Assassin Instant Trap as a card, a card text type. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Right now, this card seems like it's going to have no impact. But to your point, maybe it will at some point. It seems like this is in the blue lineup of snags and all those blue cards that have burden, whatever it's called. Like all these blue cards that at some point in Fab's timeline we'll see play, but their impact is generally minimal, and yeah, they're a sideboard card. Poison the well.
But also because it's trap, it means that Arachne Trapdoor, one of the 6 agents of chaos, can go ahead and tutor this.
Yeah.
I feel like most of the time you probably just want to find a 3-block trap, like a frailty trap or an inertia trap. Or if there's any other traps in this set, you go find. Actually, it almost certainly will be in the common slot. Otherwise, that agent of chaos would just be pretty much dead in limited if this majestic only trap.
Yeah.
So you probably want to go find one of those. But who knows? Like maybe when this card becomes like against a Dromai or something, if when that comes back, you're like, oh, they resolved a rake. I want to go get this.
Yeah.
So moving on to the legendary in the assassin class. Now we are trying to move through these maybe a little bit quicker because we do want to hit all 3 of the classes. Like we do want to hit Fang and Syndra as well. So assassin has a new legendary in this set in the headpiece. It's called Mask of Deceit. It's got Blade Break and it blocks 2. This is an Arachne specialization. And it says, when this defends, become a random agent of chaos. If the attacking hero is marked, instead choose the agent of chaos.
Yeah, this card's good. I think
so too.
This is what Arachne needs. Again, we talked about consistency and payoffs, and I think this is the kind of card that Arachne needs. It's sip, right? Starts in play, stays in play, gives you the opportunity to do this when you want. So you're generally probably going to be doing this when the opponent's marked, right? It causes the opponent to have to potentially play around certain Arachne transform types, like Agent of Chaos types, right? When they are marked, or okay, I'm marked, I want to come in with this attack or set up this point in the game state, but actually am I just going to get blown out by an Agent of Chaos potentially? And that's cool. That's Flesh and Blood. Like having to adapt and understand your opponent's side of the table is one of the biggest parts of, I think, Flesh and Blood and what makes it such an interesting game. So these are the kind of cards that I like to see.
Well, actually, now looking at this card, I'm thinking back to Reaper's Call. They might not even need to be marked. You just discard Reaper's Call on their turn, mark them, block with this, go get your trap, and then trap them as well. And suddenly they're like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah, and the text it. So before I declare my blocks, I'm going to discard this.
Yeah, because in particular, I think the part that stuck out to me the most. Okay, so I was expecting at least one card to allow Arachne to choose the Agent of Chaos they were transforming into. In my head, I thought it might be like a legendary Arachne specialization that we would see for that slot, like as a Chaos action or something. But being on the equipment, like being on the field, just makes way more sense. It guarantees that will happen once a game. So I was very happy to see this. Like once a game, you actually get to choose the Agent of Chaos that you go into. But you only get to choose if the opponent is marked, and that's very, very interesting because if the opponent was marked at the end of your turn, you very likely were already transformed into an Agent of Chaos. Because, that's what the text box says for Marinette. Unless you were an Agent of Chaos and then you marked them and you return to the Brood and then they keep the mark on them. Or the other place where my mind went to is we might see maybe a defense reaction that marks. Or, we know there's Reaper's Call, which is an instant that marks on the opponent's turn. And I like that, a little bit more agency in this chaotic hero to go ahead and make sure you're going to execute what you want to execute based on your hand texture.
Yeah. I saw someone refer to this as Traverse the Spider-Verse. It's quite funny.
Yeah, it kind of is. When you think about going and getting a 3-block trap, like just a whole extra card to go ahead and block with, it kind of is like a Traverse at home.
Yeah. I think as we record, we might have just seen another preview card, Pankaj.
Oh?
I'm trying to find out. I can't flick to Discord on my computer.
I've got it. Take Up the Mantle. It's a yellow, 0-cost assassin attack reaction that blocks for 3 and is a majestic. It says, target attack action card with stealth gets +2. If it's attacking a marked hero, instead it gets +3, and you may banish an attack action card with stealth from your graveyard. If you do, the target becomes a copy of the banished card.
That's really good.
Wow. Wait, that...
I might be an Arachne believer. To be fair, I mean, this is what we just talked about. Are we going to see... So this is not a... this is just an assassin attack reaction. Is this something that could go into a non-Arachne Agent of Chaos hero and have a significant payoff, right? Because of the marked implication. And this is one of those cards that could be that.
And I believe the dagger that you mentioned as well, the Majestic Dagger... Oh, never mind. Never mind. You know what? Go cut that part in case we had to cut the earlier one up. Sorry. But if we see... Reaper's Call is a generic assassin, like non-talented assassin card that marks. If we see more efficient ways for the other assassins to mark, yeah, maybe. I mean, my initial thought when I see this card, at least in Arachne Marionette, is this going to become a copy of Bonds of Agony or your Persuasive Prognosis that's in your graveyard when your opponent's marked? So you send, just a mopey, some other stealth attack, I don't know, your Infect or whatever, and your opponent doesn't care, and so you're like, ha. You could discard Reaper's Call, mark them in that chain link where they didn't even realize they were marked, and then swap out the attacking card with Prognosis or something.
Yeah.
And now suddenly it's a +3 react, and it's banishing a card. Okay.
I think defense reactions are going to be very important in this class constructor format, potentially.
Yeah. There's also a warrior. Warrior and assassin, right? They're kind of the kings of attack reactions. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Wow. All right. Where to next?
So before we start specifically at the Syndra of Fang, I think it might be useful to talk about the Draconic cards that we've seen. The non-class Draconic cards. So I think I want to start with Oath of Loyalty, Hayden. That card seems really, really good. So Oath of Loyalty, 0 cost, Draconic action attack. Comes in for 4, blocks for 3, so wounding blow stats. It says, this may only be played if it's a first action of your turn. When this is played until end of turn, you may only play cards that are Draconic, and it has Go Again. So 0 for 4, Go Again, 3 block. Is kind of where it is, but then there's restrictions. Obviously, you can't play this later on in the turn, and you can only play cards that are Draconic for the rest of the turn.
Yeah. My first thought was, does this work with Bramble Cinderclaw? Which Bramble Cinderclaw says your next attack, this combat chain, is a Draconic card. I went to the Discord, to the Judge Discord, and there's no official ruling yet. It seemed to be consensus was that it does work. I would have thought maybe it doesn't work, honestly, because you play the card before it becomes Draconic, but we will find out in show notes.
Yeah, my initial take was that it wouldn't, because Bramble Cinderclaw says your next attack, right? And that thing isn't an attack in the layer step. So that was my take, but we'll have to wait for release notes for that one. For me, where my mind first went was finally we see how Fang is supposed to have Draconic chain links before the dagger swings.
Yeah.
Because that's a big question mark. A lot of his cards want multiple Draconic chain links.
Yeah.
So if you use it on the first dagger, well, you don't have the multiple Draconic chain links. So how is he getting that? Oath of Loyalty, I think, is going to be a very, very important glue piece for that. You do this into your dagger, and now that dagger is on a second Draconic chain link. So you can play the attack reactions that make you a fealty on the second Draconic chain link.
I'm getting hyped up about Fi. I don't know, man. I'm getting hyped up about Fi over here.
Fi also has gotten... Yeah, I think people might forget that Fi actually gets a lot of upgrades in the set, and we'll definitely touch on that when we go into Syndra. However, I guess... Does Fi... I feel like Fi plays some number of non-Draconic cards, and I wonder if that might be a problem.
It did. Does it still?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That's the question, right? You lost things like Art of War, right? Like, Fi looks different to what it once did. I don't know. Like, and also maybe you don't need to play some of these cards anymore because of things like Oath of Loyalty. I think about... Yeah, I don't know. Like, it depends what mask you're playing, for instance. People is like, classically, the... what's the yellow card that deals 1 extra damage for each time you've
Salt the Wound.
What's it called? Salt the Wound. Yeah, for instance,
Salt the Wound. Yeah.
Like, that card's now dispatched of, and we're just playing a more pure Draconic game plan. I don't know. That's the interesting thing. I'm excited to find out, though. Honestly,
could be. I think So I think we also have to note he probably won't have access to fealty, which I think is also an important glue piece for getting around the restriction of Oath of Loyalty. And how do I say, the access to fealty gives Syndra in particular access to the 1/7s that we are seeing, right? Art of Dragon Claw, where it's 1/5, but if it's Draconic, it deals an extra 2 damage.
Yeah.
And then there's the Dragon Power card as well, which is it becomes a 1/7 if it's Draconic. Definitely playing around, making fealty and using it for that. And I think all that ties into Oath of Loyalty. I could see Fi trying it as well, but I'll be... I'm a little slightly more doubtful on that one as well. But of course, I mean, 0 for 4 go again block 3. I mean, I feel like most heroes is going to try and make this work. It is solid enough and a high enough payoff card that maybe we see a build of Fi that just uses this.
I just wonder, like, to me, some of those cards you spoke about, which I've just brought up, Art of the Dragon Claw, which is a ninja action attack at rare, attacks for 5, defends for 3, costs 1, and says when this attacks for Draconic. If it's Draconic, it gets when this hits a hero, destroy all cards in your arsenal. I think a lot of these are going to be limited cards, honestly. One thing I will say, what I love about the way they've done this, for instance, they've printed a ninja attack action that says if it's Draconic, so you have to make it Draconic, is that they get to... This is such a cool way to get around the design constraint of Draconic, which I think is really cool. You know, you get to print a cycle of this, for instance, if you wanted to, and you can... You still give it a Draconic effect, which is quite cool. But yeah.
And it works with Brand with Cinderclaw,
Exactly.
which is something Fi plays as well. So
we'll see.
all right, next... Should we cover the Draconic Defense reaction, Hayden? It's called Loyalty Beyond the Grave. It's a 0-cost, 3-block Draconic Defense reaction. It says, while this is in your graveyard, at the start of your turn, you may banish 2 cards named Loyalty Beyond the Grave from your graveyard. And if you do, draw a card.
Not sure how I feel about this card. How do you feel about it?
I was at first when I started, I was like, you can only block with this. You know, we talk about consistency and flexibility a lot, and this card, which you can only block with. You know, there is some cost associated with that, especially when it doesn't block for more than pretty much any other card that you put in its place with, because most of your cards will block 3 as well. But then I thought about it more, and I think, and you can call me out on being way too hype or whatever. What if you look at this card, the first 2 copies of this card being half a card blocking 3. Instead of 1 card block 3, it's 0.5 card block 3, the first 2 copies of this. And once I started looking at it that way, I started to perhaps see more of the value in this card. And also, I think something that's really, really interesting about the design of this card, particularly around the 2 Fang and Syndra, we won't talk about Fi yet, but like Fang and Syndra, is that Fang, being a warrior, probably is more okay with blocking with a few cards on a turn-to-turn basis. So on a turn-to-turn cycle basis, he's probably better at using this card as a defense reaction. But Syndra is the one that's probably better at using this card for the card draw, because Spreading Flames is a card that I think Syndra is almost certainly going to play. It works really well with her daggers, right? You Spreading Flame, dagger, and you imagine if you can set up just having an extra card on the Spreading Flames turn, right? Because you can just hold this in your yard, and it's not even like an Art of War or something where they can disrupt it by killing an arsenal or something. I guess they can disrupt it by banishing it from your graveyard if they have access to that. But for most of the time, you're going to be like, oh, this is my power turn. Instead of a 5-card hand, it's a 6-card hand, and I've got this Anthem effect going on. So that design part where the turn you play this, Fang's probably more happy to play this card, but Syndra's more happy to get the payoff of it, is I think really, really cool. And I've come up on this card after reflecting on it a little more for these reasons.
I think it's going to really depend on the meta. Like, how important defense reactions are, I think, is one thing, because this is like, just aside from the value of this card, like you spoke about, I think that is a good point. How important is defense reaction? Because that is an intangible amount of points to the value of this card, right? As opposed to if it was just said block as opposed to defense reaction on it. I think it's going to depend on that. It's going to depend on how we spoke about mid-range at the top of the pod, how mid-rangey some of these decks are as opposed to wanting to sit on either end of the spectrum. I think this card is probably going to be somewhere from probably unplayable to maybe quite good and solid, depending on how the meta plays out, is my view. So, yeah.
My biggest question with this was in Syndra particularly. I imagine Syndra will maybe have a playset of Sinks. I could see, her having. I think Fi had a playset of Sinks too. So I was thinking, would you play this over Sync, or if you felt like you're in a meta where you want defense reactions, would you put this in your list before you put Fate Foreseen? And I was like, I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And for Fang, I think almost certainly you're putting Sinks in at least. And similar there, are you going to put this over Fate Foreseen? Or are you going to put Fate Foreseen first and then this? But then when you look at this, are you going to put this over That All You Got? Like, there is competition
100%.
for this card. You have 9 amazing D-Reacts, Sinks, Fate Foreseens, and That All You Gots that this card is competing with. So we will have to see. I think the place where I see most likely where it might come in is actually Syndra, because of extra card on an Anthem turn, especially if she may, we don't know because of Oath of Loyalty, but if she's also playing a Mask of Pouncing Link sort of strategy and she wants to get Salt to Wound or something, just having the extra card there can just end up being so much value, just like way more than the average 3 or 4 value.
The card I would compare this to is actually Sigil of Suffering, right? And it took something really specific for people to put Sigil of Suffering in their deck, which was a card that is, almost close to being broken in some ways, right? Like Channel Lightning Valley. I'm not saying Channel Lightning Valley is a broken card, but I think it has elements of breakability that you want to exploit with repeatable card draw. And this is not that, but I think that's the closest comparison I can give of like the reason you play the card. And I'm not sure that Loyalty Beyond the Grave comes close to that. So that's what gives me pause to say, if I want to play defense reactions, is this really the card I want to play? How often am I going to see 2 of these before the game's over in those matches? That's the tough thing. So, and also the third one is genuinely terrible. Do you know what I mean? Like once you draw it. So I don't know. I have skepticism to say the least, but we'll see.
That makes sense. And I like the comparison to Aurora, because I actually think Syndra and Aurora occupy a very, very similar space.
See that.
I think they have similar damage profiles. So we've spoken about like Viscerai. He's an aggro deck, but he has a setup axis that he can work on if the matchup calls for it. Zen, aggro deck, but has a Zen state and can like block a little bit better. He has that access to work on. Aurora is the more traditional. I just want to convert 4 to 5 card hands each turn and go 4/4/4. I don't really set up very much. I have a combo side with the Arc Flicker stuff. And I think Syndra is in a similar boat as that, where she's also just doesn't have that much setup or that much defensive, not like a Zen state and not like stacking out Rune Chance. So more akin to Aurora. Also, when you think about evasion as well, both heroes have evasion of some sort. Like Aurora has arcane damage, and Syndra has my daggers just deal you damage directly.
Yeah.
So I do wonder whether Syndra makes an impact on the meta is just very much tied to, are you faster than Aurora? Because of how similar the damage profiles are. I think Syndra also, from some of the cards, seems to have a combo-esque plan she could go into. So it just means like, okay, are your numbers better than Aurora's? No? Okay, you're not in the meta because Aurora is just better than you at doing what you do. And vice versa. I could see that. And so, yeah.
We've seen that before, right? We've seen that before.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. We'll see. Should we,
Yep.
thinking, let's maybe dive into some of these powerful ninja and warrior cards and talk a little bit about them, because I think those are the cards people want to see and hear about. So maybe we just continue on with a couple of these ninja cards and then finish off with warrior.
Yep, I think that makes sense.
Where do you want to go?
Probably should start with Devotion Never Dies.
Yeah, I thought that's a good place to start.
The exciting one. Yep. So Devotion Never Dies, 1 cost ninja action attack, comes in for 4, blocks for 2, has Go Again. And it says, when this hits, if a draconic attack was the last attack this combat chain, banish this. If you do, you may play it this turn. So I don't know about you, Hayden, but for me, when I saw this card, this came to me as the Draconic Ninja's version of Gone in a Flash.
Oh, so you think it's bad?
No, it's good. Gone in a Flash is good.
Is it?
Wait, what? You think? What? Gone in a Flash is so good. Wait.
No, Gone in a Flash is good. I think my question about this is at base, this is a league tap, right? Right? Just this is a league tap, which is a pretty good base, and I think that's where you want to start. How consistently are you going to be able to turn this on? And if it's mostly at will, this card is really, really good. I think this card is maybe better than that, to be honest, if that's the case. I do think that's a good comparison. How consistently you can make this draconic though, I think is the question I have, because there's also gonna be a lot of things vying for that, and I think this is the most powerful we've seen so far, I think, honestly. So this one feels like the one that's like, okay, this is the one that goes into my deck, and that's why I kind of said some of those other ones feel more limited based to me as well, because how consistently can you make, you spoke about Brahma Cinderclaw, there's a few other ways, but I think if Syndra is to be powerful enough, like you said, to compete with something like Aurora, it needs to be able to consistently turn this card on.
Unlike God in a Flash, your opponent does get to interact with this, which does make it a little bit weaker. And of course, God in a Flash also blocks 3 and is lightning, whereas this one doesn't have that type line that you want. Like, you have to jump through hoops, and your opponent needs to let it hit to have it happen. But in theory, the Brand with Cinderclaw thing, like when you go Brand into Devotion Never Dies, you could just off 1 blue go Brand, Devotion Never Dies, Devotion Never Dies, Devotion Never Dies, because of the way it works, which I think is really, really cool. It basically makes this a must block.
Yeah.
And particularly in aggro mirrors, I think that's how aggro mirrors go, right? Who forces the opponent to block something. Like Aurora has Channel Lightning Valley being like, hey, you kind of need to block me. And Syndra has this.
That's what makes... So you spoke about before, if the numbers are just better in Aurora, why would you ever play... excuse me. Why would you ever play a different aggro hero, right? For instance, why would you play Syndra? Well, the reason is that the Syndra beats the aggro mirror, right? Because it has things like this that force you. So it might be worse against, say, the pure control deck because your own hits don't have impact, but it really dominates the mid-range in the aggro decks because of things like this. And I think that is what LSS are getting better at doing with Flesh and Blood. The last 2 formats we've seen more than one aggro deck be viable, as opposed to in previous sets where it's been a pure numbers-based thing. They've not printed the interaction on cards that maybe we're expecting to see now. And I think, to your point, this is one of those cards. How easy is it really for Aurora to block Devotion Never Dies? It's not that easy. They have decent equipment, which we've talked about before. They do have cards that can block, but what about the second time you play Devotion Never Dies, or another card that demands a block or a boost in exponential value? And that's kind of, I think, the question. So yeah, card is very good. I think card's going to have massive impact on Syndra if it has impact on the format.
Disruption is the other axis that aggro mirrors can break on, right? And I think a Draconic talent actually has quite a bit of disruption. There is the Art of the Dragon card that we spoke about. When it's Draconic, if it hits, banished card from the arsenal. And Breaking Point, since Uprising, right? Syndra seems like it'll be quite easy for her to get Rupture off. And if she just has cards like Breaking Point, like the Art of the Dragon, and this one, which just keeps telling her aggro opponent, hey, you kind of need to block me or I'm going to outvalue you. Yeah, I could see that being how she breaks the paradigm of maybe I'm less fast, but because I make you block as much, I make up for it.
Are we going to see
next card?
I just want to quickly ask: are we going to see attack reactions be more? Are we going to see more attack reactions in Ninja as well? When Ancestral Empowerment.
I know a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people were theorizing about Ancestral Empowerment for Devotion Never Dies. I'm skeptical. Like, people thought about that in Phi too, and I think Phi there were a couple of builds of Phi that ran it, but not enough, because I think ultimately still your bread and butter is still just the raw damage that you're doing, not so much the on hits. So but
if I didn't have on hits like this,
I'm not. No, definitely not. But I think the deck's also being pulled in some different directions. We don't know. It seems like Syndra does want to mark as well. And we haven't really seen a good way for her to mark, so we might be missing some of those cards. So once you add those in, you want the marking cards, you want the resource base, because she also seems to want to function off of a blue for most turns.
Yeah.
So she's going to need that. And then she's going to have her dagger stuff, right? Her dagger payoff power cards, and the other cards like Spreading Flames. It's like, will she have space to add Ancestral Empowerment? I don't know. Hard to say. Especially if she might need like Sync Velosia in there for other matchups. I think it's possible, but I'm not. I would put a lower probability on Ancestral Empowerment being a part. Yeah.
Where to next?
Oh, also, it doesn't work on Draconic action, so it wouldn't work on something like Breaking Point. It would work on.
Only works on ninjas,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking we talk about Ignite next. I think this is one of those cards that when I saw it, I was like, ooh, it's both Syndra and Phi. This is, I think, very much a Phi upgrade as well. Ignite is a 0-cost Draconic Ninja action attack. It comes in for 2, blocks for 2, and it has Go again. It says, when this attacks, the next Draconic card you play or activate, this combat chain costs 1 less to play or activate, which I think is really, really cool, because similar to Fi, I think one problem with Fi, everyone who's played him knows, you're going to draw hands without a blue, and sometimes with like 1 cost in them, and you're going to be really, really sad, because you can't really, you draw like a Mounting Anger, some other 1 cost, and 2 other reds, and you're like, this is terrible, I can't get to my 3 chain links without pitching a red to get my flame, and then you're forced like block 2 with these like clunky cards, and it just doesn't really feel good. And I think this solves it on 2 different ways, because because of the part where it also says activate. Your weapon costs 1 less too when you swing with this. So Syndra, for example, you draw all red with Syndra, you can start with Ignite and still swing a dagger, and that's 2 chain links right there without pitching a card.
Yeah. I think basically the way I look at this card looks very flexible, which I'm a big fan of in terms of it's at worst it's a bad attack, which it's still Draconic, so it's not the worst, right? At worst this is like a yellow attack that you have to play that comes in for 2 with Go again, and it counts towards your Draconic chain link. If you can get upwards of 2 plus value off of that resource, that's when you're really cooking, right? So for example, if I speak about even just like Ember Blade, right? If I have a cost structure where I always have 1 resource free to swing my Ember Blade, like I'm using my resources close to the fullest, but I have 1 resource effectively to swing Ember Blade, then this is already worth 3 at that point, because that resource is going to waste otherwise. That's a very like niche case. I think more likely what you're going to find is that you find powerful 4 and 5 card hands where you get to use this as a Draconic chain link. You were talking about like spreading flames before, for instance, things like that, where you get to effectively use additional resource in a hand that either might want 4 resources or might want to play off no resources but has a 1 cost in it to leverage the strength of it. I think card seems good.
And Syndra does seem to want a fair number of 1 costs in her deck. Her cost structure does seem to be, dagger, and then you have 1 floating. What are you doing with the 1 floating, right? So probably wants to swing swing a 1 cost, and this just helps. It's a consistency piece. It just helps smooth out those turns where your hand texture isn't what your deck is built around, like your 2 1 costs and a blue or something, which Fi got a lot of, right? You drew like a Mounting Anger, some of the 1 costs and your blue, and you're just like, this just isn't amazing. I can't buy back my flame. But you start with this, and now suddenly your entire hand just works, and I think that's really, really cool.
More ninja cards?
Might be time.
Or warrior time.
Oh, I was thinking it might be warrior time.
Yeah, I think we need to get into warrior if we're going to get through anything in this pod.
Yeah. So let's start with the legendary. We have another legendary headpiece. This one's a warrior equipment. It blocks for 2 and has blade break. And it says, when this defends until end of turn, opponents can't attack with weapons.
Yeah, Kabuto of Imperial Authority.
Oh yeah, I didn't even name the card. I just went straight to the effect because there's like so much to talk about. I mean, the first thing, I'll just start with a comparison. This is like Warrior's version of Fleshbag and Face Purgatory.
Yeah, I think that's... it's more niche though, right?
Yeah, it's not as good as... It's definitely not as good as Fleshbag, but I could see it being on a similar level of Face Purgatory, where Face Purgatory is also kind of niche. If you really think about it. Like, Aurora doesn't play it, for example. Yeah, Viscerai plays it, but there's many hands where it doesn't work, or they're not happy to go ahead and use its effect. So I'll put this on a similar level of that, which honestly I'm happy with, because I think Fleshbag is slightly egregious.
Oh, Fleshbag's insane.
I do like this. Yeah, so I would like this to be like this sort of on the Face Purgatory level, which is also very, very flavorful. Yeah, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think this card is on a Face Purgatory level. I think I have similar thoughts to I do about Face Purgatory, where I think this is going to be a sideboard card, right? I think for the most part, and depending on the meta. But this is going to be really relevant into multi-weapon decks. It's going to be really relevant in warrior mirrors a lot of the time. I think it's good. I do think there's the head slot has a lot of competition, right? Because you have good generics in the head slot as well. But I do think what is cool is printing alternatives, for instance, to Crown, that can then give you an effect that is really strong in matchups. Like, I think it's super cool that we're getting to a point where you can play 10 equipment and your equipment have impact on the way you play the game, and you really are going to the armory to grab your pieces of equipment. So, like our boots, like quick dodge flexes that we've previewed at this point. So, yeah.
I actually think this is less of a sideboard card than I originally thought. When I first saw it too, I was like, just against decks that really care about their weapons. Then I thought about it more. Even against Zen, oftentimes you can read when they're going to swing the staff that turn, like they transcend it and their resources floating. And you go put this in front of it, and then you blocked an extra 3, right? Because it stops the staff and it stops the tiger buff as well. And I think there's enough cases where a lot of heroes' weapons is like coming in for 3. Like a Viscerai, sometimes you can see that they're going to end on a Reaping Blade, and you just like stop this. So this effectively just blocks 5 on the turn, or even against Aurora, it blocks 4. You can see they're going to swing Starfall. You stop the Starfall. And then it's approaching like Husk levels of block, right? Not the same, obviously, because I think one big thing about Husk, you just put in front of a CNC. It's different. But in terms of raw math, in terms of the point value, I think it's in more matches than you might think. It's like 4 to 5 points of value, which is really, really good. And then there is the you're against another warrior. Okay, the matchup revolves around who uses this better. Or even Syndra. I think Syndra does seem to care a lot about her daggers.
Yeah.
And getting a value out of that. So you have the ceilings where the opponents care so much about the weapons that this is something that you play around the entire game. Or just it blocks 4 or blocks 5 on my headpiece.
I think that's going to be a lot more limited than you think, honestly. Like, I think people get to... For instance... If you threw this on the first attack on the chain, your opponent likely still has 2 to 3 more cards and their 2 resources to work out their turn how they want to, or they arsenal the last card instead of playing it where they were going to still keep the value. So I can see that this does have, but I think comparing this to like Husk level values or things like that, I think is a bit of a stretch, honestly. And the other thing as well is that if I'm an opponent who's playing an aggressive deck and you choose to use this to prevent me from like 2 or 3 points of damage as opposed to a relevant on-hit effect at some point in the game, I'm pretty happy with that, especially if I have any flexibility to save some of the value that you've tried to deny me through either Arsenal or changing the way I'm playing this turn, I think. So
that's fair, except, I mean, if it's Providence instead, doesn't that kind of also apply? Like, most aggressive decks aren't really like running CNCs or something, so... Right, it's not like you have a better option in that spot.
Crown of Providence as in bottom the card and draw a card.
Yeah,
but I mean,
if the aggro deck, yeah.
But then I think that piece of, so that's whatever 2 points of value. So I'm trading 1 to 2 points of value in your scenario for a cash in on my card. I'm pretty in for that if I'm playing an aggressive deck where I need to link 4 to 5 card hands together. I don't know. I'm open to being wrong. I think this card to me looks pretty underwhelming, and looks more like a specific meta and sideboard option or matchup option. But we'll see.
I saw someone make a funny comment about how Olympia wins every Warrior Mirror now because they block with this and then they buy it back with the Anvil, and then the opponent Warrior just can never swing with their weapons. I thought that was kind of funny.
That's funny.
All right, so Draconic Warrior attack reaction next, which we do need to see more of. This one's Hunt's End. This is a majestic Draconic Warrior attack reaction. Blocks for 3, costs 0. Play this only if you control 3 or more fealty tokens. Target dagger attack gets +4.
Oh, this makes me so uninterested in Fang. Just how hard these look to pull off, honestly.
There is... When I look at the Syndra cards next to the Fang cards, I am filled... Like I said at the top of the pod, my cope on Fang is reducing because I see cards like this. You see the Syndra cards, and they're like, hey, swing at both your weapons, and here's your payoff. You get your card. It costs 2, but it costs 1 less for each Draconic link. It shoots your daggers at your opponent. Blood Runs Deep, right? Is the one I'm talking about particularly. And you look at Hunt's End, and I'm just like, okay, I need to get 3 fealty tokens first. And then you're giving me
+1,
a slightly above rate attack reaction.
Yeah.
And until now, I still don't know how he's consistently getting to these many fealty tokens. We spoke about how Oath of Loyalty is one of the ways he can get to like further Draconic links, but it's kind of the only one as well. If you look at the other reactions that make fealties, Endear Devotion and Affirm Loyalty, they make you the fealty if you are already at the second Draconic chain link. Well, how are you getting there aside from Oath of Loyalty? It was like, and then you see cards like Hansen, it was like, okay, here's another payoff for fealty that's also in a hero text box, and we're
missing
likely
something.
just missing
We're
a bunch
missing
of
something.
cards, and maybe we'll have an egg on our face when next week when we have all the cards and it's like, oh, this is how he does it. But for now, I'm seeing a lot of payoffs and like clunkiness in that sense, where you literally can't play this unless you have the payoff, unless it's online, and haven't quite yet seen the glue that holds that gets him to the payoff.
Yeah, I mean, I massively agree. That's kind of where I'm at the moment, but I do think we're probably missing something. But even still, just the way that these cards are templated and laid out, some of the value on these cards and the way that it seems that they're valuing fealty. Fealty feels like it's being valued at around 2 damage. Like that feels quite high to me. I don't know. I'm struggling. Is there any other cards you want to talk about that might help illustrate this point a little bit, or cards you want to go to?
So actually, real quick about fealty, I could see why it's maybe fealty is being valued higher than we think it should, having not played with it yet. Because I think Fang's hero ability actually, like 3 fealty and then the swords are free. That's actually quite massive. It's literally each turn that you have 3 fealty, you are actually just one card above. You kind of just drew an extra card because you can just block with your blue instead of pitching it. So for as long as you have 3 fealties, you're kind of just naturally just intellect 5 while that's happening.
Fealty is also quite flexible,
it is,
right? Like that you choose me to. I mean, for the most part, you choose me to destroy them. Obviously, if your game playing gets stilted, then you get wrecked a little bit. But they do have flexibility in the thing. It's not like a token that breaks immediately.
Yeah, as long as you're playing draconic cards or creating more fealties, they will stick around. And yeah, that payoff, if you think about, the Fang had... I feel like we might have game states where it was like, the opponent Fang had 3 fealties, and then they kept it around for like 3 turns. So for 3 turns, they were just an extra intellect up on you. That is a bit of a scary prospect, I see the ceiling.
Yeah,
but
you
to your
get to
point
3,
about the
and then you
disruption-
add more. Like, they get to 3, and then they don't start using them until they have base 3. Like, that's really good. That's scary. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a scary place to be. But, I mean, it kind of, it's the whole... It's clunky, right? Your deck wants all these things. You want Draconic starters before your daggers. So far, we've only seen Oath. You want the attack reactions. You're going to want cards that mark, because I think that's probably going to be the primary ways he makes fealties. Like, he has Endear Devotion and Firm Loyalty, which are the reactions we spoke about, where you have 2 Draconic Chain Links and you create a fealty. But I'm guessing most of it will come from marking. So you want those, you want the reactions, you want the starter chain links, you probably want finishes too, because your second dagger is also going to have go again, so what are you finishing on? So, and then you want the resource base as well for the pre-fealty, for the pre-fealty part of the game, right, where you actually need to pitch for your daggers. Or if you get disrupted, then you need to have resources to build up the fealty again. So the deck is being pulled in many different directions, which I think leads to some of the clunkiness that we are seeing. But the ceiling... in a theory perspective, swinging your weapons for free, the ceiling seems to be there.
I make we've got time for one more card. There's been so much to discuss, and there is so much more to discuss over the next few weeks. It's insane, but I reckon we've got time for one more. So where should we go?
Let's go Sorn Vengeance, I think, because I think that illustrates a little bit of what we were talking about. So Sorn Vengeance, warrior action at common, costs 0, blocks for 3. We're looking at the red one here. Your next dagger attack this turn gets +3, and when this hits a hero, mark them as go again. So sharpen steel with upside because you mark the opponent, but only works on daggers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So yeah, that combination of fealty and marked and the balancing point, that is the tough thing for me as well, I think. I want to create fealties, but also I want to play good value cards like this that mark my opponent and I can get other payoffs for. It's like not only is it a bit of 2 things fighting for your attention, but then it's also one before the other as well to get the payoffs you need. So I'm struggling to just see exactly how I think, to me, Fang is going to be the hardest to build in Class Constructed in terms of how does that shape out and how does that look like. It's not a linear game plan by any means.
I wouldn't be surprised if Hunt's End doesn't make it into the list, because it's like, sure, it has the ceiling is a little high, but then the floor is that it's unplayable. I'm not sure if the ceiling is high enough to warrant the unplayability of the floor, unless he is actually just spitting out fealties, and we haven't seen that yet. But Sorn Vengeance, this is one of those okay, this answers me how I'm supposed to mark them, but I'm thinking of the turn structure. I still need a draconic reaction or instant for when I swing my
Yeah.
first dagger to have a functional turn. And this doesn't help with that at all, unless I already had a fealty that was lying around. But then we're sort of starting like we're in the middle of the game. It's like at the start, how am I making my first fealty? And how am I generating more, right? Because I need to keep using them to play Draconic cards so that my weapons have go again. And how am I getting to like the 3? It's lots of questions still need to be answered about Fang, for sure.
Yeah.
And the legendary that we've seen so far doesn't do that. So
Right.
maybe there's a Draconic... Yeah, maybe there's a Draconic legendary that both Syndra and Fang use, and that maybe helps with the marking consistency. Just like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is... I think the thing is, though, is like, to Fang's ability, you need to mark to... I guess one of the most consistent ways it seems so far is to just hit a marked hero and create a fealty token. Like, that does seem like the easiest way so far, right? But it can't be the only way. And I think whereas, like, with Arachne and Syndra, I see potential... maybe 2 archetypes that you can get into from a constructed standpoint there. I think with Fang, it feels like it does feel a bit more restrictive right now. And again, we might be a little bit, we are missing some context, but it feels like you need to balance off marked and fealty, whereas with the other 2 heroes, you can maybe balance off just the Draconic side. Or, I think this is going to be a bit more challenging when it comes to exactly what Fang looks like. But if all things line up, I mean, free daggers, cards that are on rate, having access to non-Draconic cards that you then make Draconic into the later stages of the game or through the mid-game. If you're able to balance that off and find the right balance, Fang potentially has access to the most flexibility in the cards it can play, and that's super, super strong. So,
and he does have, again, we're talking about his ceiling. Like, aside from, like we spoke about when you have 3 fealties, you're kind of just like 1 intellect up because you're swinging your weapons for free. The other thing is that the weapons themselves, Obsidian Firevein, when you are able to do the Draconic instant on it, like, I don't know, you pop a fealty and you play a Blade Flurry on that thing, that's now Zephyr Needle that with no downside, because it's 2 go again costs 1. That is
really
also a very, very strong weapon.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's like, how does it all come together? Like, is the floor going to be like just through the ground? That's how low it is to warrant this high enough of a ceiling, or like what's happening, right?
I actually think the floor is still reasonable because it's I'm sure that you can build in ways because of this flexibility, right? So it's like, okay, I haven't got my fealties online yet, but actually I'm just playing good generic cards that I'm gonna trade damage in for, and when they become Draconic, when I have enough fealties, then I really amass and ascend, sort of thing. That's what's quite interesting to me.
Interesting, because the floor I see is, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I drew my Blade Flurry, my resource card, my Sorn Vengeance, and I don't know, my Sinkville or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't have a Draconic instant or reaction in this hand, and I don't have a fealty. My turn is nothing. Like, I actually just I can Sorn Vengeance and swing a dagger. Okay, I did a 2-card 4 or something.
But that's the hard thing, right?
That's a flaw that I see, so that's what I'm nervous about.
Yeah, I think you have to build in a ways to mostly mitigate that, and that is, I mean, that again is going back to the root problem of what I think might be a cause of concern for trying to play Fang is, we spoke about consistency versus higher ceilings and lower floors, and Fang just might be that hero that has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor in the set, and it looks like it might shape out that way, and that's kind of cool. I think we need that. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been so many previews in the last 2 days. It's so much to get through, so much to wrap our heads around. There's more to come. It's been a very exciting time. I can't wait to play with a set both in limited and constructed, and things are going to happen so quickly. World premiere this weekend, pre-release next weekend. A couple of weekends time, we've got Memphis, and then I'm off to Christchurch to play, which is great. I have no clue what I'm going to play. I think I'm probably, because I'm not going to get a chance to test, I'm probably just going to play an old hero, which makes me a little bit sad. I'd love to maybe play a Syndra or something, but I might play Fi, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
You're also getting married.
That's true.
Next couple of weeks,
yeah, that's why I'm
very exciting.
probably playing an old hero. Many things going on. Cool. Well,
You want to take us out?
Yep. We will be here waiting for more preview cards, and I guess until next time, Pankaj, unless there's anything else you want to add.
Nope, all good. Hype for the spoilers. Hype to tune into World Premiere. I'm just excited to get back into brewing and playing games of Flesh and Blood.
100%. Me too. All right. Well, we'll see you in the next episode.